Welcome to Deep Dive, the podcast that goes beyond the surface, helping you live out your faith with deeper understanding and purpose. My name is John, and it's great to have you with us. Today, we're kicking off a new mini-series called Pathway to Purpose. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking and doing a few interactive activities during our Sunday service, exploring some key themes and priorities for our church in coming years. And off the back of discussions within our leadership team, these themes and priorities have really risen to the top as key areas that our church seeks to invest time, energy, and resource into. As part of getting the congregation, getting our church, getting you more involved in what that might look like, we've been doing these activities on our Sunday service and also a survey during the week. And it's been great to see so many responses and so many people engage with this. And it's not just some sort of corporate speak or business vision and mission that we're trying to achieve. It's really about understanding who we are here at MBC, what is our DNA, and how might God be calling us to live out our faith in the context in which we live. Every church does this. Some do it better than others, because each local church has a unique culture and is in a unique context. I should also say that none of this should be new for us. If you've been around church for some time, those themes of worship, prayer, discipleship, community, and mission should be pretty familiar to us. They're part of what it is to be a Christian. They're part of what it is to be a Christian community, the church. And when we read God's word, it is revealed to us that who we are to worship, who we are to pray, what we need to grow in our faith, and how to live out our faith in the world in which we live. It's all there. It's all there from God there in the Bible. Over the next several episodes, we'll explore what it means to live out our faith in these areas: worship, prayer, discipleship, community, and mission. And I hope it gives you a little bit more of a picture of where we're coming from and where I'm coming from in terms of Pathway to Purpose. But before I dive into talking about our first theme of worship today, I want you to picture a bike wheel. It could be a road bike, could be a motorbike, I don't really care. It could even be a car wheel or a little tricycle wheel, whatever it might be. But there in the middle of the wheel, there is the hub of the wheel. It's the central part where the spokes come out of this hub and join and point up towards the rim of the wheel. And I'm sure you know what I mean. I'm sure you've got that picture in mind of a wheel with a hub and then the spokes going out to the rim. Well, worship's like this. It's the center. It's really the hub. It is the heart of what we do as Christians as we follow Jesus. We worship God. And from the worship of God, well, then there derives who we are and who we are becoming and even what we do. So when we think about worship, we often jump straight into what happens on a Sunday morning, don't we? We think about the singing of songs or the prayers or the preaching of God's word. We may even think of people raising their hands or clapping even. I know that doesn't happen too much in our church. I'm more than happy for it to happen a little bit more often, but that's often what we think of, isn't it, when we think of worshiping God, expressing praise to God. But of course, worship is much bigger than that. In the Bible, in Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, we there are painted a picture of worship as offering our whole lives to God. It says, "Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship." And this passage reminds us that worship isn't just an activity. It's a way of life, really. It's about glorifying, exalting, praising God in everything we do, whether that's at work or at home, or even in how we rest and enjoy the activities that we might be doing. Worship is less about a moment and really more about a mindset. It drives our soul. It drives our heart. It's about allowing God to transform our hearts and our minds. The world around us often pressures us to conform to its patterns, but worship calls us to be different, to be renewed by God's truth, which really reshapes our values and our choices and our actions. When we live lives that reflect God's character, whether it's through kindness or integrity or love, well, we are there engaging in worship as well. Whether or not we know it, worship is something we do in life anyway. In other faiths, worship might be more visible and tangible because of certain prayers prayed or through the use of certain objects and statues and postures of the body. But others worship their jobs or their wealth or their status or their family or their body or their relationships or their sexuality or their education. As author and pastor Tim Keller said, everyone worships something. Everyone trusts in something for their salvation. Everyone bases their lives on something that requires faith. And he goes on to say, even though you might never call it worship, you can be absolutely sure that you are worshipping and you are seeking. And Jesus says, unless you're worshipping me, unless I'm the center of your life, unless you're trying to get your spiritual thirst quenched through me and not through these other things, unless you see that the solution must come inside rather than just pass by outside, then whatever you worship will abandon you in the end. Wow, that's a quote to ponder, isn't it? But even in our own secular Western city of Melbourne, we have a unique culture whereby we have the sporting mecca of the world. We have that place of worship that involves sport. And on weekends, people descend to this place of worship to cheer, to encourage, to shout, to let off steam, to be energized by their team. And we could see strong elements of worship in our city simply through the sports that are played at the MCG each week. The call in Romans 12, what it speaks to, I suppose, is the call to make every moment a moment of worship. Now, that is easier said than done. I totally understand that. And it seems a little obscure as well. It's not particularly tangible to say. But by that I mean that in everything we are and in everything we do, we are able to reflect our worship of God. It's about offering our bodies, our minds, our hearts, our work, our speech, our relationships. Essentially, it's about offering our character and our competencies as living sacrifices as we seek to worship God, to glorify Him. Paul urges us to offer ourselves as living sacrifices there in Romans 12. He says, as holy and pleasing to God. And this idea of a living sacrifice is somewhat logically impossible because, well, sacrifices in the Old Testament, and typically when we think of sacrifices, they are dead offerings made on an altar. But Paul is calling us to something different. He's talking about a daily, ongoing act, a surrender really, that is alive and dynamic and continual. The passage goes on to say, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And it is in this that we find an invitation to live counterculturally, allowing God's words to shape our thoughts, our attitudes, ultimately our actions. There's a reorientating of our lives around God's will and making this our priority. Doing these things is essentially coming to God in worship. Let's think about a group of cyclists perhaps riding closely together, continuing that theme of a wheel. Let's bring it into a bike and then a wider group of bikes and people pedaling on them. In a peloton, which that is known of, each rider helps the other conserve energy by sharing the burden of leading the pack. And that you see sometimes that they change often enough so that there's the sharing of this energy. In the same way, when we live a life of worship, we're not just running our own race, are we? We're encouraging and uplifting each other as a community. We're wanting to do that together. we're running the race, or we're riding the race together. Our collective worship creates a kind of spiritual slipstream where we draw strength from God and from one another, helping us move forward together. And in so doing, we do this, again, as an act of worship, living sacrifices, worshipping God, not just by ourselves, but with other Christians in our church. Perhaps some helpful ways we can make this more practical include beginning the day with a prayer of worship. Just start the day by giving it to God and make it as part of your daily routine to just say a simple prayer, something like, Lord, help me live in a way that honours you today. And that can set the tone for the rest of the day and keep worship central to your routine. Or another way of thinking about this is to see our work as worship, whatever we're doing, whether it's actually a job that you are getting financially compensated for, whether it's through volunteering, whether it's through caring for your family, whether it's studying, whatever it might be, see it as an opportunity to glorify God, to honour God. Colossians chapter 3, verse 23 reminds us to work as unto the Lord, and we're able to approach even our tasks with a heart that seeks to please Him. And you never know, even the most mundane acts are opportunities for worship. Doing the dishes at the end of the day, dealing with the nappies, dealing with the routines of the kids, dealing with the routines of the life administration we all need to do as part of our lives. Remember, worship isn't just something that we do, or particularly it's not something that we do once a week for an hour to an hour and a half on a Sunday morning. It is who we are. It's the offering of our lives, the surrendering of our hearts, and aligning ourselves with God. Well, thank you for diving deep with me this week. I pray that you continue to live a life of worship and allow God to shape you, to shape and transform you into who He wants you to be. But until next time, it's great having you listen to Deep Dive, and I look forward to chatting and talking to you next time. Thanks very much.